When you look at how, let's say, the hip hop community views the whole, Tupac investigation and so forth, a lot of the community is very distrustful of LAPD. They feel that there is corruption in the police department. I interviewed BG Knockout.
Them two cops right there, they've been around, when Compton had the regular Compton Police Department. Like I said, they used to take drugs from us and keep it and go plant them on people that they didn't like so they can give them drug cases. So they knew everything about everything, because one thing you got to know, there always been informants, since drugs been around. So right. I'm sure they were privy to a lot of things in all these hoods.
I've talked to LAPD guys in the past, and they've acknowledged that they've heard of situations of police corruption and that type of thing. You personally, being in LAPD for as many years as you've been in, have you seen corruption with some of your coworkers?
Listen, in any large organization, be it NYPD or LAPD or Atlanta PD or Chicago PD, you're going to have a certain element of people that shouldn't be there, and they're going to conduct themselves in ways that reflects upon the agency as a whole. Of course, LAPD has had corrupt cops historically. We've had bank robbers, we've had murderers, we've had drug thieves and drug dealers. So we have an element which is to be expected in a large organization. But the LAPD also does a really good job of policing itself. Who discovers the corruption? We do. Who prosecutes the corruption and investigates the corruption?
Well,
we do.
Sometimes the media.
Well, sometimes the media, but ultimately the evidence doesn't get gathered from them. Think about David Mack. Who investigated David Mack and put him away for prison? The LAPD. Rafael Perez. Who investigated him and put him in prison? The LAPD. So we do a pretty good job of policing ourselves. We want it to be a clean organization. At least 95, 98% of us want it to be perceived as a legitimate, law-abiding organization. But, it just takes a few bad apples to spoil the whole apple cart.
Now, David Mack, was he Compton PD?
David Mack was LAPD.
Was LAPD. Describe why David Mack went to prison.
David Mack robbed a bank. He robbed a Bank of America in association with several of his friends, and went to prison for it.
Why would an LAPD officer rob a bank? Of all the crimes that an LAPD guy can commit, because you're dealing with other criminals. You're dealing with drugs that nobody wants to be reported. You're dealing with cash that nobody wants to be reported. Like, cops robbing drug dealers has been something that's been happening from the very beginning. Why would you go and rob a bank?
First of all, David Mack was at that time that he robbed a bank, he's a uniformed cop. He didn't have access to drug dealers, and to that extent. Street drug dealers, you might get a few $100 here, maybe a couple $1,000, but you're not going to be able to get $722,000 from one criminal act, which is what he got in the Bank of America heist. So obviously he's going for big money, and and he thought he was smart enough to get away with it. He wasn't, obviously, but it's just greed.
How is David Mack connected to Death Row Records?
He's not.
He wasn't?
Not at all.
Okay. But there were police officers that were connected to Death Row Records?
Correct.
And who were they?
There was a variety of them that were moonlighting, doing security for Reggie Wright Jr., who ran Death Row Records security, Right Way Security. And so he would hire friends to come, and they would moonlight as security.
Which is completely legal.
It's legal to an extent. A law was passed that you're not supposed to provide, that cops or armed bodyguards aren't supposed to provide protective services for convicted criminals. So there was a compromising issue there. So, yeah, cops were doing it. They were moonlighting it. Again, this is back in, the mid 1990s. And they came from different agencies: Compton PD, Compton School Police, Inglewood PD, San Bernardino. So there was a variety of guys that were associated with Reggie Wright, who he would rely on to come in and provide protective services, and he liked to use off-duty cops.
And Reggie Wright, was he the one that was connected to Compton PD?
He was retired from Compton PD.
Was he the chief?
No, Reggie Wright Jr. was just a Compton police officer. His father was on the job, who was a lieutenant with Compton PD. And after he got a medical retirement, he started to do bodyguard work for Death Row Records.
I know that there was a certain level of suspicion because you now have Compton PD being employed by Death Row Records, pretty much, right?
Well, again, it was a variety of different agencies who had officers moonlighting as security for Death Row.
Right.
It wasn't just Compton PD. There were several.
But the guy that's running the company
is retired from Compton
is
PD.
retired. But do you see what I'm saying here? There's still that connection.
Well, a lot of cops retire and open up security agencies. Yeah, he went on and became exclusive to Death Row Records because that's where the opportunity was for him to get himself work. And so because he had a history in Compton, and I think that just opened the door. I don't find it necessarily suspicious or unusual.
Gotcha. What's your take in terms of what's been happening recently with the police and Ferguson and video cameras and so forth? It seems like a lot of police abuses have been brought to light, which previously have not been brought to light because everyone didn't have a video camera on them. Number one, do you feel that these types of police abuses are more prevalent now, or is it just that more people have cameras?
I believe it's more people have cameras. And I'm not going to necessarily agree that it's police abuse. Oftentimes we see what appears to be abuse, and then when more investigation is conducted, we find out that it's not necessarily as egregious as we think. So we have to look at every individual situation and look at it wholly, not just from a 5-second video, and determine whether it's police abuse or how appropriate the use of force was. Because we have a tendency in society with social media to see something, believe that's all there is to it, and then judge based on that.
Right.
But as we've seen over and over and over again, there's these alleged or perceived abuses that have very reasonable explanations.
For example, the current FBI director feels that there is a spike in crime because of there's more police misconduct videos out there.
Yeah, again, I think that people respond oftentimes to limited information. And that can cause a spike in crime, a spike in police confrontations. Again, each situation has to be evaluated individually, and you can't rush to judgment. You got to figure out what preceded the video and what took place, from multiple different perspectives in order to really evaluate a situation. But our society wants to immediately judge based on socioeconomic perspectives, prior encounters with law enforcement. So it's a complicated issue.
Do you agree with body cameras for police?
I do. I think body cameras are one of the best things that cops can have. They oftentimes exonerate police officers. We just saw a recent event where there was a teacher alleging that she was racially profiled in a neighborhood, and she made a big thing about it, and it kind of went viral. But then when we see the actual dash cam video, we see that the cops were acting absolutely professional, and that there was no indication that there was any kind of racial component to it. So, the cameras are your friend.